From the NewsChannel 5 network, this is Open Line.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Line. Glad you are with us tonight. And I think it's a great show tonight. Tonight is part of News Literacy Week. We're going behind the scenes of our Investigates unit. We're telling you how a story gets put on the air, all that goes into a story getting put on the air, all of the scrutiny. Earlier today, I did a story that highlighted Jennifer Krause. That story aired on NewsChannel 5 this morning. And then at 6 o'clock, I did a story that highlighted our chief investigative reporter, Phil Williams, and one of his recent investigations on state contracts. And so I'm very happy that Phil Williams is with us. He's joining us, as all of our guests do, now via Zoom from his home. Phil, thank you for being here.
Good evening. Good to be with you.
So I want to show this story and also just kind of, again, tell people what news literacy is all about and what we're trying to do here. This is a national thing that our station is part of, to kind of tell people, give people the ability to determine the credibility of news and other content. This is really all about trying to differentiate between what's real news and what's fake news. And we felt like it was important to do this.
And helping people to understand how we go through our process. I mean, we spend, as you know, we spend, days and days and days usually working on our investigative pieces. And it's really important for us that people, believe our stories have credibility. And part of that is explaining our process, because most people have no idea what goes into, a news story, or especially an investigative story.
What makes a healthy news consumer is understanding what goes into that. That there's some content you will see that's just kind of thrown out there, and then there's some where there has been painstaking work that's gone into it. And so what they ask of each of us is to kind of highlight a story that we did. And as I said, Jennifer's story, we highlighted her work this morning. She chose her work on nursing homes and how COVID got into a nursing home, and it was excellent work. You chose these state contracts. And I want to show the story we did here in a moment, but kind of set that up. Why did you choose that story?
Well, I think all three of us chose to focus on what we've been doing during this COVID period, what I've been doing here from my home office. And a lot of my time has been spent trying to understand how taxpayer money is being spent, because there's just so much money being poured into the COVID crisis. And so, our job is to be watchdogs, to kind of look and see what the government is doing with our money. And so, a significant portion of my time has been spent on following the money. And so, I really wanted viewers to understand, it's a very tedious process sometimes, and to understand everything that we put into this kind of investigation.
Talking to you, I learned stuff. I mean, I saw the stories, but it was great to sit down and talk to you. We did this interview last week in your back porch area. And so this is about 4 minutes long. Let's go ahead and watch that. Then we'll come back and talk a little more about it. And then we'll take some calls from viewers. But let's watch this story that aired at 6 o'clock. The Investigates meeting starts at 9:15 each morning.
The no-bid contract.
It's where our chief investigative reporter, Phil Williams, first discussed his most complicated investigation of the pandemic.
Altogether, probably the initial story took 3 to 4 months just to pull together, what we thought was happening with the money.
This story didn't come from a tip. It came from a question that Phil asked about how the state was spending tax dollars during the pandemic.
From the beginning, I was curious about, where was this money going to be spent?
In April, Lee's team had ordered up 5 million face masks in a no-bid contract with the Renfro Corporation.
It led to a series of reports about an $80 million spending spree by the state, spent on things like sock masks and COVID supplies, awarded to companies without competition, some of whom were politically connected.
Anytime there is no bid spending, whether it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, we want to know where's that money going?
Phil made multiple public records requests to the lead agency for the pandemic purchases, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency. He got a spreadsheet that showed massive spending, but something didn't seem right.
And so I went back to the state and said, are these numbers really correct? I mean, I spent hours looking at the numbers.
It turned out the spreadsheet the state provided had errors. Someone had entered contracts twice, inflating what had really been spent.
We could have run with a story based on the numbers they had given me, but it would have been wrong.
Phil kept making records requests for emails, contracts, and expenditures, trying to get a true picture of how the state was spending taxpayer money.
I would look at the data, I would discern what I thought the story was, then I would run it past the state to say, here is what I'm preparing to report. Is this correct?
His first story aired in September.
State data shows that in the first 4 months of the pandemic, Tennessee spent $79.6 million on personal protective equipment, ventilators, and other medical devices, with no bidding or real proof that taxpayers got the best product for the best price.
After the story hit, we then had some pretty tough questions for the governor.
Phil followed with direct questions for Governor Bill Lee about why he decided to award certain companies no-bid contracts.
We asked these questions not to try to make the governor look bad. We asked the questions to try to get very specific answers to specific questions.
And yes or no, did you ever talk to Robert Swope about his interest in doing business with the state?
I have not.
Phil started making regular trips to the Capitol to question Governor Lee, which was more efficient than emailing questions to his PR people.
When you're emailing with PR professionals, that they will give you statements that don't answer the question. So at some point, you just have to be able to, question a human being, question the person in charge.
Phil obtained emails in which career health department employees warned higher-ups that a company hired to do COVID testing was not qualified to do the job, and that it was a bad deal for taxpayers. He posted those emails online so everyone could see them.
In this day and age, when there have been so many doubts raised about the media, we want to be transparent. We feel like we have a need to be as transparent as possible.
The whole Investigates team knows most people don't have time to ask for public documents or dig into state spending. We take the responsibility seriously.
Tell the story as completely as we can, as honestly as we can. That's our job.
That's our job. I really enjoyed putting that together. And there's so many things that stand out. We can talk about some of them. We're going to start taking calls. But the thing that stands out to me immediately, 3 to 4 months. That's how long it took for you to get the first story on the air. You were doing research for that long. Is that right?
That's right. And to be honest with you, I still do not think we have a good handle about exactly how much money has been spent. There are so many different pots of money out there right now that I've gone to the state, and in some cases, I've had state officials tell me we really don't have a good handle on this ourselves. And so this is a continual process. I mean, I would imagine probably much of the next year will be spent trying to figure out where that money has gone.
And what do you think the biggest misconception is that people have about the work that we do, not just that story, but the work that we do in general?
A lot of what I hear from people is they think we are driven by an agenda. And for example, we have right now a Republican governor. And someone posted on social media the other day, here you go investigating another Republican. Our job is to investigate the people in power. I've been around long enough that my career dates back to when the Democrats ran the state completely. And I did extensive work on investigating contracts and corrupt behavior by Democrats. So it's whichever party that is in power that really gets the focus of our investigative efforts. It's not because we're singling out Republicans right now. When the Democrats were in power, I was dogging them just as much. And to be honest with you, when I look back at my career, I think I probably have put more Democrats in prison than Republicans.
Because Democrats, yeah, they did run the state for a long time. Now there's a supermajority, and it's the other party. But that's a great point. Democrats ran the state for a long time, and that's who you were questioning. And so when you hear lately, when people say, "Oh, that's fake news," or they just dismiss offhand, the work that goes into things, and then there is some stuff that is just kind of not credible. What do you think about that? I'm encouraged personally that we are trying to educate viewers. This whole news literacy campaign, I think it's great to kind of go behind the curtain, see what we do, try and let people know the difference between something that's credible, something that's not. But when you hear people immediately come out, and they've done it with my stories, I know they've done it with yours, and immediately just say, "Oh, fake news," what do you think?
Well, yeah, fake news has come to mean, by and large, news that you don't like hearing. Because, and I'll tell you a story. You and I have talked about this many, many times over the years. But, coming out of high school, I thought that perhaps I was going to go into the ministry. And then ultimately, I decided this was my calling. And part of this being my calling is an absolute commitment to tell the truth the best way that I can, and to have an absolute allegiance to the truth. And I think for most of us in journalism, there is that sort of sense of calling that it's, we want to be the truth tellers. We want to be the ones telling the stories that society needs to hear. We want to be digging up the skeletons that public officials would rather hide. And so, I take this personally. And when people accuse us of fake news, I take that personally as well, because I never will intentionally put anything on that is not what I believe to be 100% true.
And there were so many sound bites, is what we call them, I could have used with our interview, and that was a very good one that you said, something to the effect of, it's a sacred oath that we have, and yeah, we got in this to try and tell the truth and to try and make a difference, and I think obviously people in power try to manipulate the media. They try and maybe not answer questions. They're those things are out there, but part of being an informed news consumer, you need to kind of have a good idea of where you're getting your news and a good idea of all the work that goes into it. And if you're being manipulated, if it is something that's coming from someone in power, do you want to get your news from somebody that's not asking hard questions? Do you want the news to come from the people in power, or do you want it to be independent people who are asking hard questions?
And one of the things that, people sometimes question, for example, my tone and questioning the governor or questioning some other public official. But, I learned early on in my career by making mistakes that I would ask a question and I would get an answer. But when I would go back later to pull together my story, I would realize, they really didn't answer the question. They took it in another direction. And so, when I am questioning a public official, I am not only have a specific question in mind, but I am listening very closely to see if they're actually answering the question. And I think, that story had a little clip where I was asking the governor, I said, there's this litigation that has floated out there, potentially involving a Metro Council member. Did you ever talk to that council member? And his response was, well, I really don't want to talk, I don't know anything about litigation. And I had to bring him back. I said, but yes or no, did you ever talk to Robert Swope? And so that's, how we have to sometimes be a little tough, because public officials are very skilled at not answering the specific question that is asked. And so, when I may come across as being tough on someone, it's because I'm trying to get them to answer the question that I and probably our viewers have. I want a specific answer to a specific question,
and it's a question they know. And there,
right.
It is a very specific question. It's not, recite some number that may be obscure. It's, did you meet with so and so? They would know the answer to that question. They just have been reluctant sometimes to answer questions like that. And so it's not some gotcha question. It's a very specific question. And you're right. I think PR people can be trained to answer questions in all kinds of circuitous ways, and I think politicians, as they get more and more polished, are coached. You read any book about debate prep for a politician, the first thing they'll tell you is don't answer the question, go off on what you want to say. And so that's kind of what we have to be up against. And then there's pushback. You get pushback for being rude or whatever the case may be, asking a question. But I would say these tough questions can sometimes be a gift, and not only to the viewers but to the politicians, to help explain what's really happening.
Yeah, because, for example, in this case, we're dealing with how taxpayer money has been spent. And so, or in the case with Jennifer's story, she was dealing with whether nursing home residents were being protected, and your stories dealt with whether workers were being protected. And so we are trying to ask the questions that we think our viewers would want us to ask. And it's not us just, pursuing these questions for our own interest. We're trying to address what our community wants us to address.
Well, that kind of sets the table. I think this is great. So we have a bunch of calls. People want to talk to you, Phil, and so I guess we can take a call right now, right, Taylor? Let's just go on and let's take a call here. Ron is on line 1. Hello, Ron.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I'm not partial, Democratic or Republican. I vote the way my heart feels. I'm 50 years old, and it ain't for me. It's for my grandkids and my grandkids and great grandkids. Open-minded person. I think distrust in the media is really, really exploding. I know a lot of people that have went from watching, your regular TV channels to going to the internet and getting some of their media from that, or actually news. Not only that, as you were talking, not answering questions, I've called in here 3 or 4 times, and like I said, I'm open-minded, try to be fair about stuff. I've asked a question about 3 times as far as, what happened at the Capitol was not right, but I brought up the thing about New York, Oregon, San Francisco. It seemed like or not mine, but, there were the people sitting in public figures that should have done something about it, and not let all these people go to distrust, or get burnt down and all that stuff. What happened to that? I've asked that question, and I still ain't got an answer yet, and I'm looking for that. If you can get me out there, what's the difference? Thank you.
Right. Okay. What I can't answer questions like that, but I'm fascinated by, and I appreciate you calling in. I really do. Fascinated by the notion that you're not getting news from the regular sources, so you're turning to other sources, and we're seeing that, and that's concerning in some cases. You're turning to news on the internet, and what we're trying to say is maybe it's credible. Just have an idea of what is credible. Have an idea of what goes into putting that news that you're reading before your eyes, and is it fact checked? Is it scrutinized by a large number of people? Is it highly partisan? Is it designed to get you to feel a certain way? Is it something that is reinforcing beliefs you have? Ask a bunch of intelligent questions. I think that's what we're trying to get across here. But Phil, you heard Ron. Ron's called in a couple of times, and he has some serious concerns about things, and he doesn't feel like the media represents things well, and you heard him say he's going to the internet. He's not alone.
Yeah, and when I talk to, especially to student groups, the other thing I really encourage them to do is to look at the byline. Who wrote the story? Do a little research about that person's background. Is Does that person have a training in journalism? Does that person have a history of, calling it down the middle? Or, often these days you'll find, well, that person actually works for one of the two parties, or has worked for one of the two parties. And so, I think it's also worth looking at to see, what the background of the person is. Now, and he brings up an issue that I think is worth discussing here, because when we've seen the riots, we've seen protests, we've seen social unrest, we spend a lot of time even talking about what words to use, because for example, with Black Lives Matter at the Capitol, those were protests. Now, when you had a handful of people go out and start, doing vandalism, setting the courthouse on fire, those were riots, but they weren't necessarily the same people who were involved in the protests. And that happened recently when I did a story about the head of the local Proud Boys, and I wrote a headline, talked about him being at the protest, and someone said, well, why didn't you call it a riot? Well, we don't have any proof that he did anything other than protests outside. We have no proof that he went inside. So, it doesn't matter whether it's Black Lives Matter or the Proud Boys, we wrestle and try to be responsible in what terminology we use. If someone was just protesting, that's different from other people who may have been there as well who were rioting. And so, we agonize over these words, trying to make sure that the words we use are as accurate as possible.
That's a great point. We do agonize over the words, and I think we have another guest that's joined us right back there on your table. Your
yes, cat. This is Savannah.
Savannah. Oh, very good. All right. Well, Phil, we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back. We'll take more calls. So if you're on the line, hold on. If you want to call in, lines are open. 615-737-PLUS. 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.